Greetings and salutations, everyone. Hope folks are doing well. Had my game night last night. Exciting, especially in these times when it seems like we can only get the gang together, I don't know, every 3 weeks. Maybe not even. It seems to really depend. And if folks have had, obviously the holidays played a part, and there was some just family stuff that happened for folks. Everyone is good, but it just meant that we try to put it off for a day, and then, well, we couldn't make the next day, and then, okay, we'll try to reschedule, then the next week, and something would come up. So just one of those things. It happens. Even playing remotely, it can be difficult. But we got to play last night, and one of the reasons why it took us maybe a little bit longer to schedule our game was this was kind of a momentous occasion for the party. They were, I don't want to say in dire straits, but it was a tough. Sorry, putting some. It was a tough squeeze, or not squeeze. It was a tough situation for them. They were in the Caves of Chaos, and I will show the map. It's a little different. I'm going to throw the Caves of Chaos map up here. Oh, let me go. Let me put it in reader full screen mode. They were in the Caves of Chaos down here. They've gone in through D, met up with the goblins here, and I'm not going to recap too much because we already went over this in one of these other recaps. You can check out that stream for that. I think it's from December 11th, maybe, something like that. And they had gotten themselves into a situation in this room over here in which they were basically surrounded by goblins. They had goblins behind them, goblins in front of them. I'd given Bonebreaker, the Goblin Chieftain, some more heavily armored sort of personal guard. The ogre was here, had joined the fray as Bonebreaker, the Goblin Chieftain's champion. And the party, one of the guys from the party had decided he was going to challenge Bonebreaker for leadership of the goblins. Bonebreaker kind of pulled a little switcheroo and said, all right, challenge accepted, but here goes my champion. Well, the party countered with, well, we have a champion. Because they had summoned an earth elemental. And the earth elemental was basically the same, pretty much the same as the ogre. They basically got to have this face-off of titans there, but the stakes are rather high because there were at least, when we start this thing off, 12 goblin combatants. Well, more than that, 12 goblin spear goblins, I was calling them spear goblin combatants, 2 more heavily armored goblins, 1 goblin chieftain, and then there were some essentially goblin civilians that were just kind of stuck in the middle here, and then who knows what else. So I wanted the party to be at full strength. I didn't want it to be something in which really a lot of things could happen. I was envisioning, well, what if kind of bad things happen? I didn't want it to be something in which the party would feel like that they didn't have the full complement of their powers, their abilities, their personnel, because I don't let them play characters who aren't there. So if the player's not there, their character's not playing. So I wanted everybody to be, at full strength. So that however they were going to go, if they were going to succeed, if they were going to go down swinging, that they'd be doing it with all hands on deck and not shorthanded. So that kind of was part of why the game took so long to be, to come together. But finally, we were all together. So we spent a little bit of the first part of the session really just kind of bringing everybody back up to speed, making sure that everybody was aware kind of what the parameters are. And then it came down to, okay, we're going to run this combat. Now, usually I run the hirelings, I'll run any NPCs, I run the summon elementals when they've had them. In this particular instance, I didn't want it to be them to be, we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know how this combat was going to play out. So I did a couple things that I wanted to make sure that it wasn't a situation where they're watching me narrate against myself. And I didn't really want to do that, frankly. So what I did was I said, okay, I usually control your earth elemental, but for this combat, at least because at least to begin, if it runs, theoretically, it's supposed to be champion versus champion, just one-on-one. I don't want to be just playing against myself and everything that brings, not even just from a narrative standpoint that I'm just going back and forth, but just in terms of, okay, if they're going to make moves, it's kind of hard to put yourself in, I think, on both opposite sides and say, okay, what this is going to do, then what they're going to do. And I didn't want it in a situation where I wasn't giving maybe their champion the full benefits of whatever things they wanted to do. And I didn't want to, and of course that meant that by the same token, I would be able to play I probably couldn't play the adversary maybe as well as I might want to, because I'm splitting my mind share up between these two things. So I said, you can control your earth elemental. I will let you do that, even though it's not something normally I do, but this is kind of a, a special situation. I don't want to play against myself. I want you to be able to do any kind of tactical choices with the elemental that you want to. So you take over playing the elemental. I'll just play, normally the other champion, and then all the NPC types I'll fill in. I put everybody in initiative, and this, I think, slowed things down a bit, but not in a bad way, because I think while this combat basically took the entire session, I don't think anyone was bored, because all the decisions, each round was meaningful. Every time one of the champions hit one of the other ones or missed, you just feel that tension rising a little bit. And I also narrated it, that things are happening. Everyone seems to be kind of this knife's edge of who's going to act, who's not going to act, what are they going to do. You can just feel that someone's going to do something, but no one seems to want to take that first move. So I really played that up, but I put everybody in initiative because I as I said to them, I said, look, we don't know, right now this is a combat between two people, so they're on combat time already, and it just made sense to me that I put everybody on combat time or on initiative time, seconds as opposed to minutes. This way, when things happen, we know the order. We can say if somebody wants to jump in and do something, because one of the big things that can happen is the person who sometimes thinks fastest gets to act fastest, which isn't always fair, and it doesn't always make sense, because if I blurt out to do something, then it becomes but either people want to stop me or do whatever, but I act, but because I spoke first or I spoke quickly, does that mean that I just get the jump to get to do it on everything? In this case, I wanted, for both sides, I didn't want there to be this sense of like someone gets to take the jump. Either one of my NPCs just gets to free do something because nobody saw it coming, or what they didn't have a chance to respond fast enough, or for the party's sake, whatever they want to do. So I thought, I'm going to put everybody on initiative order. That way, we're just in that rhythm of moment to moment. How are you reacting? You kind of know where you stand, whether you're before, after somebody else. I didn't mind that they knew where all the actors were, essentially when everyone's actions were. Sometimes I used to like to play with actually everybody rolling initiative every round, but I had a lot of things, I had a lot of combatants, and so maybe I could come up with a better system to make it a little bit less unwieldy. I think it worked really well when I was playing asynchronously. I was playing, play by post, and so I could run through all those initiatives, and I could put them all in one post and have all the initiatives. It was very easy to do that. I don't have counters or things physically that I can monitor where everybody is, so I'm kind of scrolling back up the chat to see where my post is, where I put all the initiatives. So there was a lot, and I had a lot of people. So I put everybody into groups. We had the Spear Goblins were one group. Bonebreaker's Personal Guard was a group. Bonebreaker was a group. The Champion was a group. The Goblin Civilians were a group. The 3 party hirelings were individual. And then the party was individual, and then of course the elemental was individual. Now I could have done group initiative or something else, but I really kind of like everybody being spread about it. It made some interesting situations come up where you can't time everything perfectly. You, at one point, which was I thought it was going to be key, but it wasn't. Somebody didn't get a chance to act, and it came back and kind of bit them because they were just their turn wasn't up in the order. But it did mean that there was a little bit of housekeeping kind of going through it. Like I said, maybe if I was using something like Roll20, it would have easier tools to do that. It would have some other things, but we're in Discord, and Discord works for us pretty darn well, so I don't really have any complaints about running it that way. Maybe if I had a more of a battle station, a dungeon mastering battle station for my game, I could organize things to make it a little bit more convenient for me. Now, nothing says... interesting. I like the feel of the first person to say they do something gets to do it first. I feel like it's a great risk-reward system. I don't disagree with you, nothing. But I think what it can do, and I've probably been the beneficiary of this, I think it is one of those things that can use equalization at times. Because I don't think just because you do get people, just player-wise, some players are thoughtful, some players are quick. Right or wrong, and I don't. And one thing, it's fine if it's kind of scattered. If you have everybody's about at the same thought and speech pace, it's fine. You talk first, you go first. I talk first, I go first. If everyone's kind of at the same level, but I have seen it in games, and I've been the beneficiary of it as someone who will make kind of quicker decisions and go faster. That I'll always get the jump on the other guy who is not a worse player than me. Nothing. He's just more thoughtful. So I think I don't want to penalize someone for being thoughtful, and I don't really want to reward somebody for just being fastest out of the door. So I think by giving initiative, it's a great equalizer. It does allow you, if you're playing, and one of the things I'll say is, look, if you're playing Mr. Slow, I'm the slow-footed, sloth guy, but me as a player, I think quickly, should I go first? I don't know, because as a player, I'm quicker on that, or should the guy who's playing Thievy McThief Squirrel Man should go first? Well, probably you'd think Squirrel Man would go first. So I do like, I don't dislike if everybody's equal, saying, hey, who goes first talks first. I think there's definitely validity to that, but I also think that it's nice to equalize it. It puts it back on the, it makes you have to be a little bit more adaptable. Sure, maybe you got great ideas, but you got to wait. So I like to equalize it, but I've played both ways. There's nothing wrong with playing it just, hey, first up speaks, but I think it can get abused. Not that as a player I was trying to abuse it, or as a player somebody else was trying to abuse it, but it can definitely, over time, I have found, and again, I'm speaking from someone who was the beneficiary of this, you end up just getting ahead of the other player, and you end up always being kind of the one to set the tone or set the thing, which I don't think is always fair. And I use fair in the terms of game fairness. So what I've taken to doing is any kind of situation that timing is important, I'll have initiative. And I try to explain it to the players so that they don't, it's not one of those things. It usually used to be, roll initiative just meant you were going to combat. Well, I will say, well, we're going to roll initiative, but not because it's necessarily combat, but because timing is important. And if you're someone who is quick-footed or you just happen to roll well, then it's your moment to get in there and shine. And it does force sometimes other people who may not want to be in front to be in front or to wait. Hey, you're happen to be first up. I don't want to be first up. Okay, well, you can do nothing. But then there's that tension of, well, I'm doing nothing. Am I wasting my turn by not doing something? So that's how I do it. But I don't fault anybody who doesn't do it that way. So we got into the initiative, and it did lead, and it also had those interesting moments of the first couple of rounds where people really were thinking, should I do something or not? Trying to anticipate, is the battle turning, and is it the time for me to cheat or to do? I mean, I say cheat, I should put cheat in quotes, because there were no rules. No rules were set down. It was really just champion versus champion, but nobody said that nobody could interfere or anything like that. But am I going to do something? They haven't hit each other. We had a couple of rounds where nobody hit each other. It's like, oh, that glancing blow did nothing. Okay, the other guy responds, also misses, doesn't do anything. Should I do something yet? Is it time? Should I wait? And I was really thinking about for the NPCs. I'm like, okay, when's I thought Bonebreaker's going to make some moves, but when is he going to make? When is he going to make some moves? What is he going to be waiting for? And of course, the party is thinking, well, what are we waiting for? And so when a couple of blows were landed and they started to see, because I let them see their hit points. I let them see the hit points for the elemental too. It was a part of me, again, wanting to give them kind of full tactical control of the elemental for this combat. It's not something I'm going to give them every combat, just for this special occasion. I let them roll and see how much hit points their elemental had. So they knew exactly, okay, it started at 16, and they actually rolled pretty well. It was a 4 hit die elemental, so they rolled 4d6, 16 hit points, and then it's down to 13, then it's down to 11, and of course, that's the other great thing is you, in these modes, maybe remember, like, it's, I don't know why it makes me remember, you think about kind of hit point bloat as editions have gone on, you think like a 4 HD monster, that's fairly beefy, that's no chump, 16 hit points. Which I always kind of like, because even that means that if the ogre had gone wild or the elemental had gone wild, just unleashed them on the goblins, a couple of well placed spear shots or throws from those goblins will take down that big bad, that ogre or that elemental that seems so impressive. Still, you're not that far off from getting shot down, even by something as weak as kind of a. They weren't quite minions, but they were just handful of hit point goblins, if there's enough of them and they can get their attacks off. So there was a lot of this, who's going to do something? who's gonna do something? Who's gonna make that first move? So one of the guys, he decided to. We were maybe a few rounds in. Both of the champions had managed to land a few blows. They obviously didn't know how many hit points the ogre had, but they knew. I think the elemental had maybe just gotten down into single digit hit points, and I think they were trying. I don't exactly know the plan, but which is fine. I could only see what his intent was, and he didn't. And this wasn't something where they're like, "Oh, we're gonna fool the DM." This was him kind of freelancing, because he didn't tell anybody else what his plan was either, which was kind of funny. And I have to give the players credit here, because they gave each other a lot of latitude to do something and didn't try to really metagame the heck out of it. And what I mean by that is, so this player decides his character is kind of going to act like he's casting a spell. He's not casting a spell. He kind of has these. His character is patterned after sort of a Witcher type, so he has these kind of glyph things he can do. But he tried to really outwardly act like I'm kind of walking forward and I'm waving my hands and I'm saying some kind of nonsense, like he's casting a spell, even though he wasn't. And I'm not sure what his intent was. If he wanted to, there were some theories he was trying to normalize the behavior so that he did that a few times and nobody reacts. Then when he does try to do something for real, people think, oh, he's just a crazy guy, so leave him alone. I don't know, but he did that move. And the other players are like, "What are you doing?" And we're like, "Well, what are you doing?" But they didn't. No one tried to step in and say, "Whoa, time out." I tell them to stop or whatever. They were willing to say, "Hey, look, this is what the guy does. This is what he does." So he does that, and that kind of was the first like, okay, so now Bonebreaker is like, oh, all right, like, or no, I don't even think he saw. I think I rolled to see who saw it, because there's not a lot of light in the room. The way the room is described is there's a cauldron in the middle room, in the kind of the center of the room, though I kind of offset it, fire, and they had a torch. One of the guys was holding a torch, so they had kind of a firelight, this torchlight. The goblins, for me, they could see in the dark, so there wasn't really a big deal for them either way. But I was kind of playing with that, so they can't really, and not everybody can see everything super clearly. There's smoke, there's the fire, there's these two big meaty monsters in the middle of the room. So I rolled some dice. Okay, who sees it? So the personal guard see it. Bonebreaker's personal guards see it. They tell Bonebreaker. Bonebreaker leaves. He came out and he left the room. Came down around here and he was gone for a few rounds as he went to get the 6 spear goblins who were hanging out over here. So he went to get them. All the party knew is that Bonebreaker had left. I think a couple more rounds go by, or maybe it's the next round, and the elemental decides to lift up the cauldron and try to splash the hot, whatever, soup, just mush, gruel, whatever's in there, stew, onto the ogre. And I had to figure, I wanted to figure out how to rule that. So one, I had him take a little bit of damage. It ended up being kind of a wash, because I think he took 2 points of damage from lifting up this, I don't know, however hot that iron cauldron was. And then I think he did 3 points of damage from the spray. So I was trying to think about, well, how to make this fair. I don't want you have, and I did make 1, maybe 2 errors in computing damage. I just didn't notice it until towards the end of the fight. And then I decided by that point, they've been already playing this way, so I'm not going to change it. The ogre, by the books, in BX does a D10 of damage. I was only having him do a D6 of damage, so he wasn't doing as much damage. And then I forgot, I had used some stats for elementals in the past, but I couldn't find what I did. So I looked up the elementals in the expert book. They didn't have a 4 HD elemental. I think the minimum, the lowest version of elemental they had in there was 8 hit dice. And the 8 hit die one did a D8. So I kind of ruled, and it looked like the progression seemed to be the 8 hit die one did D8, and then like the 16 hit die one did 2D8, something like that. So then when I was kind of backporting, I'm like, well, okay, if we look at it and say, if we look at that kind of progression, and then we go down from 8 to 4, you might say, well, does it do a D4 damage? Because that kind of fits that damage progression, but I was like, that seems way too low. He's doing less than what the goblins with their spears do. I said, that can't be right. So I just gave them I just made a D6. So they were doing D6 damage on each other. So we get to the cauldron, and I thought maybe he's gonna literally like just toss the cauldron at the ogre. If he doesn't, he wants to splash the ogre with the hot stuff. I ruled it as a save. which I think was fair. My thought process was, one, I thought, well, this is kind of interesting, because when you think about using environmental stuff in the combat, and I know it's more of a bigger deal, I feel like, in something like 5th edition than it is in BX, but you have some creatures might have a high armor class that their saves aren't that good. In this case, I'm not sure it makes too much of a difference what a fighter's, I don't know what a 4th level fighter's offhand their save against Dragon's Breath, which I used, versus not, but it's an interesting way to say, hey, this thing, I mean, one, if it was like a swarm or something that needed, you wanted to really area affect it, that would have worked. If there was multiple opponents, that might have worked also. But in this case, I was thinking, well, that's kind of an interesting play. If you think this thing's really hard to hit with weapons, but maybe it's not that great at dodging, at reflex saving, getting out of the way of stuff like that. It's an interesting way to try a different attack. But I ruled it was just a D6, but I said it was save, take half damage. So for this one thing, since there's only one of it, I don't know if I would do it differently in retrospect if they had a whole bunches of these, because having essentially auto damage, maybe not the way to go, but I thought in the moment, they're essentially they're so close to each other, they're so big, it's kind of hard. I almost felt like it's really kind of hard to miss when they're just, it's a big thing, big body, they're just kind of splashing, and I thought it made sense. If it became a repeated tactic, I would probably just do save negates all or something similar, because I wouldn't want it to become an overpowered attack. But this was a one-off. This is a classic. I need a ruling, and there was my ruling, and it ended up being pretty much a wash. He ended up rolling, I think, so I guess I had that worse. Actually, it was a little bit worse for the elemental, but only by 1 point. Elemental took 3 damage, and I believe they rolled 5 on the damage, but the ogre made the save, so the ogre only took 2 damage. So in essence, in that exchange, the ogre actually came out slightly better. But I thought it was an interesting tactical move. Now, what I had the goblins do in the interim is the goblin, one of the goblin sort of bodyguards, told some of the commoners there to snuff out the flames, the kind of fire that was underneath the cauldron. Because I had this concept that what they would want to do at this point is, it was kind of, both the big guys were sort of wearing each other down. I was really kind of wondering, I think everybody was, whether one of these guys was going to really get ahead of the other one. You hit and you hit twice, the other one misses twice, and suddenly that you're 8 hit points or whatever ahead, essentially, right? If you're gonna look at the scoreboard, suddenly you're well ahead, and sure that you can get that reversal, but it might start to kind of cascade. Then if you get a third hit, and then they hit, even if they start to go hit for hit, it's hard to, they don't, neither one of these creatures had some way to really undo if they got behind, other than just the luck of I hit and they miss kind of thing. Nothing says, burning an ogre with hot soup is fun. I might have had it do no damage, but have a save to take any constructive action for a few rounds. Is he freaking out about being burned? That would have been another way to do it. That could have been another way. I don't know about a few rounds. That would have been something. I think if they had, and this is something where I probably would do it a little bit different in terms of what I would probably do now that you mentioned that, and I'm thinking about it, is I think the best thing would have done was to ask them what the purpose of it was. I got the sense they were just trying to damage the ogre, and they didn't complain when they got some damage. So I think that's what they're going after. But ideally, I should have just said, well, what's the goal here? And if the goal had been to, say, burn its eyes or get, distracted or do something like that, then I might have said, okay, well, then we'll have like a save versus this, and then that'll be it. Or, yeah, now he's out of action as he's scraping out whatever mush out of his eyes. So, I think I would leave that I would probably make that kind of player-led. Let the player determine, this is why I'm doing it, which is good to ask about anything. I'm sneaking. Okay, why are you sneaking? I'm sneaking to do this. Then you know the consequences of success and failure, right? If you sneaking, or maybe sneaking is not the best one, because, it's not a bad thing to ask if you're sneaking, but it's usually pretty obvious you're just trying to be stealthy and quiet. But let's say you're picking the lock to be stealthy versus you're picking the lock to be, so that when you enter the room, it's not obvious. There can be multiple reasons why you might be taking one action. Figure out what that reason is, and then you can say, well, okay, if you succeed, then whatever you were trying to do, that ultimate purpose, you've succeeded at. And if you failed, that ultimate purpose can be overturned. That can be the consequence. So if you're trying to pick the lock and you're trying to do it to be really quiet, if you fail, it might mean that you did pick the lock, but maybe the whole lock falls off and makes a big clanking sound. And now the whole, who knows how much of the dungeon is now aware that you're there. Or you're picking the lock so that you can sneak in and be undiscovered. Well, yeah, you picked the lock, but now there's all kinds of scratches and stuff on the lock, and it's obvious somebody picked it, as opposed to it looking like no one's been there, right? So there's a lot of things you can play with. So in that case, yeah, I think ultimately I probably should have, if I could do it over, if I had a do-over, I probably would ask them, like, okay, what's the purpose of the soup throwing? But they seem to be satisfied with the damaging part. So that was fine. But yeah, I think it's always cool to think of these environmental things. And yeah, it's always definitely cool when people come up with all kinds of interesting reasons other than just straight damage. In our case, though, the straight damage held through. So it didn't end up being much of a game changer. They snuffed out the fires, and then I was trying to think about what was their next move. So they snuffed out the fire, the cooking fire, but there still was the torch. Because I think their game plan was at this point was, okay, we're going to get them into the dark, and then we'll have a clear advantage. And who knows what's going to happen with the two champions. But either way, at least on these other guys, they're going to be fumbling around and we'll be able to just jump on them. That was my plan. The party saw it. I mean, I wasn't being subtle. I mean, they're snuffing out one of the fires. It's not exactly much of a mystery what they're doing. So they started looking around for torches, but they had none. Or they didn't have any at the ready, and nobody wanted to really put down the weapons and things they had to go digging around and holding a torch. Now, one of them was holding a torch and a shield. So they had that. But nobody else really wanted to get one. So then my next thought was going to be, can they take out the torchbearer, who was one of the player characters? Like, can they focus fire on the torchbearer, try to get the torchbearer down, and then get that light turned off? Was kind of where I was thinking. It's getting down to the nitty gritty now, and we had a little bit of, I guess it was kind of dissension in the ranks, as the characters were kind of, the players and the characters were, and it was interesting was there wasn't a lot of meta talk. I didn't ban them saying, like, you can't talk about what you guys are going to do or anything, and they did a little bit, but there wasn't a lot of it, and they were just kind of making character decisions and moving them. So one of the guys decides to try to, feels like looking at the numbers and looking at everything, decides like, hey, you know what, I don't think we're going to win this. So he it was funny, he steps up, he starts clapping, and tries to ask for a parlay. And one of the other characters is immediately going like, nope, we're hanging tough, and the other character's going like, what are you doing? But they played it in the moment. It wasn't a, what are you doing? Can we talk about this and undo your action and do something else? They were like, he's like, hey man, this is what I'm doing. I feel like we need to talk. We need to kind of stop this before it gets too far out of our favor. Bonebreaker's response was, of course, call your elemental off and sort of, bend the knee kind of thing, and then we'll talk about it. And of course the other guys were like, nope, we're not he's not speaking for us, we're not doing it. But it caused a lot of confusion, and in that, I believe it was, they were going through that back and forth when the elemental, who only had, oh man, it was really down to the nitty gritty. I think the elemental had 3 or 4, maybe 5 hit points left, finally got a good licking on the ogre that was not returned. The ogre went down. The ogre went down, and they were all happy about that, but then Bonebreaker just said, because Bonebreaker, I think, still felt like he had kind of the advantage here, and thinking that he was going to focus fire on a couple of folks, so he calls out to his people, just kill them. Enough with this kind of game. Kill them. And I was rolling pretty well in their morale, so they weren't, the ogre was kind of a blow, but they still felt pretty good. And immediately I had 6, so they had numbers. They had 12 of these spear goblins. Oh, and I forgot, the Bonebreaker had come back, because I remember Bonebreaker had left. Bonebreaker had come back with 6 more. So they start off with 6, and then he got the 6 more. So ultimately he had 12. I'm misremembering a little bit. He had the 6, and then he went and got 6 more. So he ended up having 12, and when he had come back with the 6 more, the party was, I think maybe I don't even say like I'm a super tactical person. They're not, but I feel like, the Bonebreaker via me was doing these kind of tactical moves, moving these guys into position, tightening the ranks to kind of block any exits, and the party wasn't really doing any kind of adjusting or anything. They were just kind of just kind of holding fast, which meant that Bonebreaker was kind of free to move folks around. So the folks in the back kind of tightened up the ranks. I think they had 2 deep because they were three and three, kind of blocking the exit behind them, which would be blocking up in here. He had the other ones kind of line of blocking over here. He felt pretty good. He still felt pretty good, and he thought, if I can nail a couple of these guys fast, then I still have a good advantage. I feel good about it. And he did. And this was one of the I don't want to say it was a controversy, but again, I got to give my players credit, because what happened is that the goblins in the back struck out, and I just rolled randomly to see which hirelings, because the hirelings were in the back row, which hirelings were going to get hit. And the magic user had to eat like 3 attacks, and they ended up getting hit by 2 of them and was just killed outright. And one of the party players was like, I thought that because this magic user had sleep. That was his spell. And I think they were looking forward to using sleep. That was part of their plan. At some point, they were going to cast sleep and try to take out a bunch of the goblins. But, the one character was like, but I thought he was going to cast sleep. And the other one, and I was like, well, all this stuff happened in one round, and his action already happened. So he's still processing everything that was going on when he suddenly got stabbed. And the other character, and I also said, and it's also like, you guys were really confusing him. I said, look at it from the hireling's point of view. You got one guy's wants to basically surrender. The other 2 want to fight. Nobody's given any direct orders. It wasn't like they had said, hold your action, and when the ogre goes down, cast sleep. Like, nobody had said anything. He's like, but I said, like, wait for my word. It's like, oh, yeah. And even the other character player was like, we didn't tell him to do anything. He doesn't know what's going on back there. Nobody was conversing. Everyone was kind of freelancing a little bit, so he didn't have a chance. So that was kind of what I thought was going to be really a big blow, because sleep in this situation would have been super powerful and helpful, but they didn't get to cast it. He was struck down by spear blows. And then what's more is the other character, one of the player characters, the one who wanted to parlay, had positioned himself right by the other spearman. He got stabbed, and it looked like he was going to die, because Dice Maiden was all over the map today. But the 2 damages, I had to make 2 damage rolls. So I was doing multiple d6s, and I was just saying, okay, you got hit twice, I'm just going to roll 2d6 for damage. The 2 damages in a row against the magic user, against the player character, boxcars both times, 12, 6 and 6, 6 and 6. And I thought that guy was going to die. He's like, well, I'm down. And I use this kind of hero dice kind of dice pool system. One thing you can do is you can spend hero dice to sort of stabilize yourself. So he just had enough of those dice to spend so that the negative hit points didn't kill him. But we had forgotten something, which I kind of had to retcon, which was I do the shields shields maybe splintered or whatever, the sundered. So he should have been able to splinter her shield, and we did fix that later. Because I remembered it when the other character was hit with a massive amount of damage for some reason. But he has more hit points. He's a little bit more sturdy. Hey, Fluffy the Griffin. Hey, Don. Thanks for coming in and hanging out. That you could splinter the shield. So he ended up being kind of coming back from the dead somewhat. But at that moment, it looked really good. I thought like Bonebreaker's made a stroke of tactical genius here. He's quickly he took out the magic user, not even really. He wasn't really aiming specifically for the magic user, just by a little bit of luck. Just took that magic user down. And then it looked like he had taken that player character down. Got retconned a minute later, and I had that player character back. But it looked, hey, this is good, right? We have knocked out 2 of these guys. Yeah, we got that elemental, but we don't think that elemental's got too much left. So we feel like we can try to do something with that. We're 12 of these spear goblins, and I still got my 2 heavy guys, and I got myself. I'm good to go. And then the next round or whatever, the players just started to eviscerate goblins. Those poor spear goblins just started getting just torn apart. And, I like to let the players narrate their killing blows. And, I mean, they were going like Vlad Dracula from the 80s, Dracula movie, where the guys like got him on the sword point and it's sliding down the blade, and he's calling out to them to, how many more of you do I have to kill? I mean, it was like really good. This guy was going full like just Conan the Barbarian on these poor goblins. The elementals just like just smearing goblins. I think at one point they narrated that he knocked the goblin, just splattered it up into the ceiling. Suddenly he went from 12 goblins down to 8, like really, really quickly. And the tide, kind of turned right there. Because Bonebreaker, I kind of played him up that he's kind of a blowhard. He's a little, he's got better stats and he's got better equipment than the spear goblins and whatnot, but he's not some massive, he plays it up like he's a Bonebreaker, but he's not really. So he was not interested in really getting into that fight, especially when it was starting to look like it was getting out of hand. The party was still pretty inefficient though. They probably could have done a better job. So the one player was really like, yeah, like just like smashing through some of these guys and saying like, join us, which was, it was compelling. But then like one of the other players was busy. So I'd mentioned that in the Caves of Chaos, in this room back here, that there's a barrel with a bag of gold in it, and the goblins can give the gold to the ogre to get support, which is basically what they did. And I showed it off in the last session where the goblin fished the bag out of the barrel when the PC showed up, and then later took the bag to the ogre, who had the bag with him when he was fighting. And there was some interesting discussion at the beginning of the session about they were imagining all kinds of stuff in this bag. It was actually pretty impressive. What if it's like dust to throw in somebody's eyes? What if it's some kind of magical control? So they were trying to, at one point, they were trying to come up with all these plans to separate the bag from the ogre, but I was kind of like, well, how are you going to do that? I mean, that's really hard. I was, and in true, BX fashion, I was ready to give them like that 1% shot. They mentioned that in the DMs thing, like, hey, give them a chance. I was ready to give them that 1% shot. So talking about, well, maybe we can fire a crossbow bolt, and the crossbow bolt can sever the rope or twine that's holding the bag to the ogre's belt. And I started running down. It's like, okay, they're in melee, they're massive. You're gonna, like, how close are you getting? Like, how are you really getting a good view on this? And, it's just not easy. But once the ogre went down, one of the first things one of the guys did was run and got that bag. And I was a little bit like, wow, could really be something that could bite you in the butt. That's one of those decisions that if things had gone wrong, I would have been like, why did you waste a whole turn going and getting that bag? You can get, if you win, you get the bag later. If you lose, the stakes are pretty high. So maybe the bag doesn't matter that much, but they were intent on the bag, and it didn't end up costing them. But there was some wasted momentum when they didn't make their decision. This is where I think some meta conversation would have probably helped them in terms of, like, what are we doing? Because they were kind of vacillating. On the one hand, yeah, they look like being aggressive, but they're being aggressive towards the ones in the back. They're not pushing forward towards Bonebreaker. And once they started to pull back, I rolled morale. Morale was starting to fail, and they were slaughtering these back goblins. So at one point, the back goblins fled. The goblins that were kind of in between them and Bonebreaker and Bonebreaker's personal guard threw their spears, but then backed up. So they kind of made one last attempt to wreak some damage, and if they'd been able to take somebody down, maybe that would have changed things again, but they weren't. Their throws did not do particularly well, so they kind of backed up. So they had this kind of space, and even though they were talking this great game, like, yeah, like, how many more do we have to kill, they're kind of moving towards the exit. So it was a little bit of a mixed message, and I think they'd gone strong and like, okay, those guys are running, and they were mixed. I think some of them wanted to, there was a little bit of discussion, but they didn't press forward. If they had kind of pressed the case, I think they would have gotten it. But Bonebreaker's thinking back there, and now I had him go back into his little room with I think he has 2 wives he's got 2 female companions back there who also are armed. But now he's not liking his odds, because yeah, the players look pretty darn impressive, because they hadn't engaged the players before, and the player characters seem to just be mopping up the floor with the spear goblins, and he didn't have a lot left. So now he's thinking of, okay, they're 5 or 6. Now I'm down to 5, but 3 of them are these 3 of them are these not very good, or I guess 6 including him, but 3 of them, these spear goblins, are just not showing themselves to be very impressive troops, and it's not looking good. So, but again, the party's not going strong, they're not really pressing their advantage. So it's the kind of mixed signal thing. So he decides to make a gamble. And he says, you got the bag of money, which was, it's his money that he paid the ogre, but he's kind of acting like it still is. He said, hey, you go now. You can take that bag of money you took and you can go. But, reinforcements are already coming. And if you don't leave now, we are going to crush you. And he's lying. He hasn't called for any reinforcements. The way these caves are, if somebody were to come up and show him now, they might just kill him as a sign of his weakness. So it was a total lie, fabrication. He's bluffing. But the party doesn't know what's down there. They don't know that he's in a dead-end room as opposed to there are other corridors back there. They already know that he left at one point, came back with more folks. They don't know what he's got back there. So they took it. I was actually a little bit surprised. I thought for sure they were going to say, like, we already got the gold. We're coming for you, Bonebreaker. But they didn't. But they made one more play for, like, come with us. And I rolled some around. And actually, a couple of the spear goblins actually decided to turn and go with them. But then they were cut down by the bodyguards. Like, no, you guys aren't leaving. And they're like, hacked them from behind. They did get some of the female goblins. So I kind of rolled some dice. I think I actually forgot to roll for the male non-combatants. But I ended up rolling that 4 females and one of them bearing like a toddler goblin actually followed them. And so they made this like, I'm the winner. Like we beat your champion. Like I'm the strongest one, follow me. And some of them did leave. And they were at that point, they were out of attack range of the goblin bodyguards and whatnot. So they were able to leave, but they got the 4 females, and the females can fight, and these were the non-combatant females, so they'll have to, just as far as goblins in general, they're not weapon, they don't have any weapons or anything, so they will have to equip these goblins. It's going to be interesting because now they've got these creatures that are with them, and I'm curious how that's going to work. They're kind of responsible for these goblins now. These goblins, they said, hey, follow me, and these goblins are coming. I think I'm going to roll again for some of the male non-combatants to see if any of them after the fact kind of go after to join their wives, essentially, and kind of join this new cause. So I will roll some dice to see if some of the males, because I think I really just forgot. And I was like, okay, this many females and whatever came with you. So I will rectify that. But I'm interested in how they're going to play this, because they have these civilians, essentially civilians. Now, they can equip them. They can turn them into more or less hirelings, but they don't have to pay them. But it's not like the influence of this chaos thing going on is any less. And in fact, it's playing into the influence, because this is kind of part of the whole thing that sort of my version of this is this kind of the strongest prosper. You keep what you kill. You conquer. You follow the strong. So they're following the strong. It's kind of part of the process. What I've been talking about with this chaos thing keeps kind of going on about this process of doing this. This is all part of it. So the influence is not gone from them, and they're still drawn to the caves. They're going to have this expectation now that the party is going to find their place in the caves, either occupy Bonebreaker's spot, go back in there and finish the job and take over Bonebreaker's place, or scale up and take out something else, right? To climb this process until you're one of the strongest. I mean, that's what they want. That's what they're going to be about. And if the party doesn't deliver on that, it could be interesting. I don't know what's going to happen with that. It'll be some interesting stuff. But I'm definitely curious as to how they're going to handle that, what their plan is going to be. But they have it. So they took the gold. They took these new followers. And I had them narrate. It was one of those interesting things came up. And it was a little, I would say it's probably a little bit maybe a touch unfair on my part. Well, I wouldn't say super unfair, but I didn't just hand wave them out the door. I was like, okay, so now, I started narrating it backwards. All right, now you come out of the room on this direction, you can go left or right. Which way do you go? And at one point, the guy's like, one of the players was like, don't we just go the way out? I'm like, yeah, which way is that? And they're like, oh. I was like, yeah, remember, it's, I don't do that, where it's just like, oh, you've completed the quest, so we can just hand wave getting back to town. It's like, no, you gotta maneuver your way out of here. Who knows what may happen on your way out? Nothing happened, and they actually, either by just taking mostly left turns, they were able to find their way back out. I know that one of the players had been mapping the dungeon, but it can always be one of those things on a given game night, you just can't find your map or whatnot. But They did end up finding their way out into sunlight with their new goblin cohorts, with the body of their fallen hired medium. And that was where we ended the session. So it was a lot of fun. Like it took a while, but I felt like because I was trying to make sure to interface with everybody at every step. I could have hand waved a bunch away and just waited for somebody to want to do something and then say, okay, this is when it happens in initiative order. But I really kind of liked playing up that tension of each round something's happening. Even when nothing was happening, it felt like something was happening because there's this rising concept of who's going to make that move, who's going to break the truce, or the kind of the unwritten, unspoken rule of we're letting these two champions fight. Who's going to break it? Because it really was, I think it was a foregone conclusion. Somebody was going to break it. Somebody was going to start to cheat or make a move. It was kind of a question of, well, who's going to do it first? But nobody really wanted to do it first. And I think Bonebreaker was kind of waiting, probably waited too long, probably waited a couple rounds too long. But there was a moment where it looked like his champion was kind of winning. There was a moment there where it looked like, okay, he's going to win. And I think, Bonebreaker was probably looking at that. I was kind of joking about having the judges like it's a boxing match and how they're scoring it, an even fight after, 4 rounds or whatever. And then it just turned, and the elemental, and really just some luck because they're basically evenly matched, just landed a few and got a couple of breaks that the damage kind of swung. So it was in the elemental's direction, and then boom. And the elemental also went first every round, so there's just a point of the ogre got to be able to return blows, but there was always going to be that advantage to, hey, he went first. So as those hit points are decreasing, it was, he had a little bit of that just permanent advantage just being first on every round. So it was tough, but it was fun. I really appreciated that the players kind of let each other play. They didn't try to micromanage it. They didn't try to meta talk it out. They didn't try to stop each other from doing things that were a little bit, I don't want to say goofy, but just a little bit, in character, right? In maybe in a meta sense, you're playing it like we're literally playing it like it's a squad level war game or something, then not efficient, but character driven, which is cool. Oh, the one thing that they did have a risk. So I mentioned I think they would have done better ultimately, or I don't say better, had a chance to really just take out Bonebreaker completely if they'd gone aggressive. But the one thing that they did point out to each other is how low on hit points they were. They were all kind of up. They didn't have a ton of hit points. I think one character had like 2 or 3 hit points left. It might have even been, it wasn't 1. It might have been 2 hit points. The other one had 3 hit points. At the end of it, the elemental had, I think, 2 or 3 hit points left. So they were still all up, and they looked strong, but they're a couple of die rolls away from just, anything really bad happens, and it could have cascaded again in that other direction. So they were really on they had a fine line. So there was definitely a lot of risk, and if they'd just gone aggressive, there would have been, I think they could have taken out Bonebreaker. I still will stand with that, but there was some risk that if they did go in and a couple of some of those bodyguards were heavier armed and heavier armored, and they just got to hit once on a couple of people, and that would have been it. So it would have been maybe a little bit of luck. They didn't really, I always mention, I've said many times, my players, they all have custom classes. They all are overpowered compared to your vanilla BX characters. They didn't use any of their abilities really, so it wasn't a case of they had advantage, because the advantage that they have over vanilla characters are these kind of abilities they have, not their base stats and not their base attack bonuses or anything like that. And they were just going with just their straight up attack stuff. So it wasn't like, maybe they had some wrinkles they could have thrown out there still from some of their abilities, but it was really just going to be like, we're going to have to take a chance, maybe think a little bit outside the box. How can we do something impactful to kind of to get that route? Because it was kind of like either they could have gotten the other side to really just completely route. They didn't quite get there. They got halfway there because part of them did route. But then they went defensive. But probably maybe that's the best move. Like I said, I always favor that, like, go aggressive when you can. That think of like rounders, you know, when the house, whatever, then you take down the house. And I was kind of thinking like, here's your chance to take down the house. Because now you go back and you wait for a while. All kinds of other creatures and things. Bonebreaker, I had this whole idea that Bonebreaker's gonna have to go and prostrate himself to like the hobgoblins or the orcs or somebody to try to get them to shore up his position. And maybe he'll show back up as a flunky. Maybe they'll kill him and just take over. But you know, things are gonna reform, and you know that unoccupied space is gonna get occupied. So they've got decisions to make. Now, nothing says, did you ever find out what the player was trying to do with the fake casting? No, I'm not sure. I think at one point, so I think part of what he was trying to do is he has an ability, but he's got to be really close to use it. And I think with the parlay, I think his secret plan when he was trying to stop the fight in parlay, I think he was actually trying to get close enough. So he's got to be like 10 feet or something. You got to be right up on somebody. Close enough to use that ability. But the problem was he couldn't talk himself past the goblin lines. He was like, because when he's like, okay, parlay, and then he tried to like slip by the spear goblins to kind of talk, you know, thinking he would get like a face-to-face or get right up with Bonebreaker, but they weren't having it. So that part didn't work. I think with the fake casting, he might have been trying to set up to I may have to ask him because I'm not totally sure. But I think maybe he was trying to gauge their reaction. Maybe he was trying to cover up. I'm not sure. It didn't end up actually playing out because they didn't get a chance to take out all the lights. So their plan never came to fruition. And then on the flip side, he never got to really use that kind of casting thing or whatever he was trying to do. So it ended up being kind of a wash. The only thing maybe he did was it kind of took him out of, well, not the casting part, but when he went to parlay, it kind of put him in a bad spot once hostilities really started. But yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe he's got to keep it close to the vest in case he wants to try it again. I don't know. It was definitely an interesting tactic. The party was not terribly organized with their tactics. They all had a little bit different ideas of what to do. And so they didn't maybe work together as well as they could, but it makes for one of those fun things because it ended up being full of these kind of character moments for them. And sometimes when you're playing super tactically as a group, you lose those character moments because you're just being super focused on playing that chess match. And it's not about does your bishop or pawn or knight have personality. It's about getting them in that best position. They weren't doing that, which meant that just as a tactical fight, they kind of disadvantaged themselves a bit. But at the same time, this session was a lot of fun because it was all these characters kind of playing to their characters. The one character kind of wants to be this sort of leader type was there doing like Conan stuff, you know, Conan the King, like by this sword I rule kind of deal. The other one was playing it more like I want to live and I want to rescue my teammates kind of thing. And then the other one was doing what he usually does, which is kind of being a wild card where you don't know exactly why he's doing what he's doing. Maybe even he doesn't know why he's doing what he's doing, but he's doing it kind of thing. So it was fun. And this time it worked out for them. It was a close run thing. I can't say that I was shocked by the fact that they persevered in a way. It wasn't the way I thought they would. I thought maybe they would get that sleep spell cast off. At some point they would cast sleep, knock out a bunch of the guys, you know, do something like that. I didn't think that it would turn out that way, but that's what makes playing these games fun. Is if I could have predicted with any kind of certainty what they would have done, how it would have worked out, then we don't need to play the game. So, you know, to me, it was like that even makes it more of a success. I had no concept they were going to end up having, you know, what, four walk out of there without, I mean, you know, at the end of the day, they walked out. They did not totally dislodge Bonebreaker. He's still there. They got his ogre bribe gold. 4 of his goblin citizens and one, you know, kind of toddler goblin. But they lost their medium. They lost their magic user hireling, which is kind of a sneaky big blow because, man, sleep is just so good. So good at this point. I mean, they you know, when the goblins first came and they took out their torchbearer, they were able to knock them all out with one sleep spell. That's kind of a nice, powerful tool in their toolbox. And unfortunately, just the way the cookie crumbled, I didn't have them target the magic user. I mean, it would have been tactically smart for them to, and he was clearly a magic user. I mean, wasn't masquerading. He wasn't trying to pretend to be anything else. But I just rolled dice to see who they hadn't been given any particular orders. So it was just, okay, they're all back there. Who do they all attack? And it just happened to be that like 2 or 3 of them decided to go after the magic user, and then 2 of them hit. And then those 2 that hit both rolled 6s on damage, which just completely gutted the poor magic user. I don't know if there's anything. I think the only thing I really feel like could I have done something differently is maybe I could have had the combat. Like I think, one of the things I mentioned that combat was slow. It took the whole night basically, but it wasn't a slowness that I think hurt the experience. I think that everyone was super pumped and super excited about the session. So I kind of feel, I don't want to say justified, but I kind of feel like running it slowly and kind of having everything out there play out. I thought it made for a good experience. The experience of that showdown was good and exciting for the group. And I had a lot of fun with it. They had a lot of fun with it. So I don't have any issue with how I did it. If I'd done it that way and people were zoning out and it was just taking too long, and I think that's one of the nice things with Orosar combat is just the act of doing the stuff is fast. It's very easy. Okay, hit damage. You get a sense of, the first time I have to look at the chart, okay, 14's going to miss, 15's going to hit. All right, great. Once I kind of got that, then you just like, okay, hit damage, hit miss, hit damage. That part goes really quickly, and there's no abilities. Oh, but I use this, or I use, that. There's the shield's sundered bit, but that only happens once. So, you don't have to do a lot of stuff. People don't have extended turns. There's no, okay, well, then I do this, and then I accent surge, and then I do that. It's like, no, I just, boom. People were just kind of acting, and when they weren't, they were just quickly skipping. So it was a slow, orderly, systemic combat, but it wasn't bogged down. It wasn't boring. It wasn't mired in kind of meta systems all interacting. So it was pretty quick in that regard. I do agree with nothing as far as other things that the spilling of the cauldron soup could have done. Like I said, I think maybe if I was to do it over again, I would ask the player, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to blind them? Are you trying to hurt them? Are you trying to do something else? Are you trying to make the ground slippery? What are you trying to do? And then we could figure out from there kind of what the effect was. I think it was okay because I think they were just thinking damage, and that's what we did. But it might have even been as a teachable thing to ask them what they want, to make them think about, oh, really, we could do other things. Well, what happens if we spill it on the ground and well, maybe he trips. Oh, what happens if he trips? Well, then he's down, and then you have +2 to attacks, and maybe he has -2 on his attacks, and okay, get them thinking in that kind of tactical space of more than just doing damage, but how can we do things? So that might have actually been really beneficial. Next time I will try to remember it. That might be maybe the one thing I'm saying. Yeah, if I was going to go back and do something over again, that might have been it. The other thing I might have done, I think it worked out. I think, if you were been here since the beginning of the chat, and I mentioned my initiative rundown, I had a lot of different groups of initiatives. I probably could have streamlined that some. I like the idea that Bonebreaker, the champion, and the spear goblins all went separately, because they couldn't then just do a big blob of actions. That you have this uncertainty, much like, okay, the magic user, if the magic user had gone in a different order, he might have been able to cast sleep, but unfortunately, he was either too fast or too slow. His turn went, then after his turn, the ogre goes down. Then after the ogre goes down, then Bonebreaker calls out to attack. Then the spear goblins, who are slower in initiative, attack, which meant that, well, the magic user didn't have a chance to cast a spell because he didn't have a chance to pre-think about, okay, if this happens, I'm going to cast sleep. Nobody had talked to him and said, here's a specific trigger, so kind of hold your action for that trigger. And then because he was taken out, he didn't have a chance to act. But that leads to some cool tension. If it had just been kind of the big blob of players, the big blob of bads, you might not have gotten things where things could happen because, okay, Bonebreaker speaks, but then I have a player character who gets to go before the spear goblins go. So Bonebreaker's given the attack order, but then there's a little bit of lag. And in between that lag of when the spear goblins attack, there's another PC that gets to go. Maybe that PC gets to do something to change it. I kind of like having that. When the one thing with kind of team initiative is you just kind of get everybody acting in one thing and everyone acting another thing, and it's easier in some ways, but you lose some of that I find interesting kind of chaos of battle or whatever, in which case you want to act on something, but you can't because you're still, I just call it usually like you're still processing, you're still moving. You haven't because I say, hey, look, I tried to impress upon the players, like, listen, I know it seems like the way you run things in D&D combat is it's like you take turn, then wait, then you take turn and wait. But really, everything's kind of happening at once. So I said, hey, you're instead of happen, you're still kind of finishing up what you're doing, and then this is happening. And by the time you notice and they process and everything happens, then it's your turn to go in. So I try to kind of give them that basis. But I know it's more work, and I know it kind of slows things down a bit, but I like that kind of granularity of and just kind of that a little bit of a it's not the same as when I was rolling up initiative turn round by round, but I like that little bit of, okay, you can do some planning, but who knows what's going to happen in these intervening steps. You might not get a chance to act next round because you might be dead or something else might have happened. So maybe that adds that tension of, well, should I do this now? Because I don't know if I'm going to go again, or I don't know what the situation's going to be when I go again. I can't totally manage it. Now, another says long fights are fine if they have a dynamic story. Yes, and there was definitely a story here, and I think the other thing is this: the stakes were pretty high because if they lose this fight, they're either dead or they're captured. I mean, I would have captured them. I was already thinking about, well, if I capture them, what's going to happen? And I kind of had ideas. Okay, they're going to capture them. They're going to put some kind of geas. He's going to take them up to kind of take them up to the acolytes. Some currency to up their position in the hierarchy of the process. And then there'd be some kind of geas kind of spell, and then I'd send the party out and see how that does. So I had plans for them being captured, but of course, if some of them died in the process of being captured, well, that's just how the chaos cookie crumbles, and that would have been that. But yeah, it is important if you're going to have a long combat. It's not just combat to have a combat, and in my game, we might have combats rarely. I mean, they may not. It's been probably. I mean, fictionally, well, no, they cast a sleep spell, which kind of was, but that was like 2 or 3 sessions ago, maybe at least 2 sessions ago. I know we had a session that ended up being kind of canceled, but we just sort of chatted about the game, so I don't know if I count that as a session, but it might be a month or more of game time between combats. It's not like, my game is not combat heavy. My party is not, they're not, I mean, they like combat and they enjoy it, and I think that they appreciate it, but they're not raring to get as many combats as possible. So throwing in kind of a long one like this, if it's something that has stakes and it's their choice, they kind of walked into it, then, it worked. So yeah, it was a really fun session. They were kind of virtually high-fiving each other afterwards. Maybe a little bit bittersweet because they keep kind of losing these resources that are not easy to get back. Now they can probably, I'm sure they can get one of these goblins that they have with them now to become their new torchbearer. So because they were definitely keenly feeling the loss of their torchbearer when one of them had to hold a torch and then couldn't hold a weapon or shield. They ended up holding the shield, which was helpful for them. But then they couldn't have a weapon, so they were kind of hamstrung a little bit there. If they had the torchbearer, they would have had that part covered. One of these goblins can replace them. None of these goblins can replace that magic user. So they got some decisions. Are they going to go back and... Well, they have decisions. Are they going to try to press their advantage while they know that Bonebreaker is down? Are they going to head back to town? Or what are they going to do with these goblins? I mean, they have a lot of decisions to make, so it's going to be super interesting. But yeah, that was the game. It was a lot of fun. It was probably their first really super big kind of combat. I mean, this was, in a sense, Bonebreaker was the first kind of, I won't say big bad evil guy, but maybe small bad evil guy that they have faced. They didn't fight with, they haven't fought with Bogwig yet. It's been all kind of positioning and jousting. This is where they kind of got into it. Now, Bonebreaker's still there, and I'm going to have some fun figuring out what's happening. A lot's going to depend on how much time goes by. I don't know. They're all hurt, and they don't have a healer, so they don't have somebody who can heal them quickly. So if they want to get back up to full strength, they have to spend days out of action, and those days will help Bonebreaker either recover or help somebody else move in. So we'll see. I'm pretty sure I remember the hobgoblins. I think their hobgoblins are up here somewhere. I gotta remember. I don't remember who's off in this area. There's an owlbear somewhere. Maybe I forget where the owlbear is. Anyway, we gotta figure stuff out. But they made their first move into the caves. I think they would consider it successful. I would probably call it half successful. They walked out with some gold, but they didn't go back because I also had for them and look, it's fair to them. They were wounded and they were looking for the door. We were getting late, and I think they really wanted to get out of there before we ended the session. But I had the secret door from the ogre's place open. I just figured the ogre didn't close it all the way. Probably didn't think who'd care. And so he left it open. So the ogre lair, and I think there is some loot in there, is still in play at the moment. But if they wait even a couple days, I think someone's going to come. They know the ogre's there. They know the ogre's gone. Bonebreaker knows. Maybe even grab that stuff and try to use it to, as tribute to somebody else. So this was one of those things that they're not great at sniffing out treasure yet. And I specifically, when they entered that room, I called out like, oh, and there's this panel part of the wall that you thought was just a wall, and now it's sitting ajar, and they have none of it. But I get it. Low on hit points. You're not, a trap would be lethal at that point. There had been a pit trap on the other side of that secret door or something like that. Anything could have been lethal at that point. So I understand why they didn't take it, but if they don't go back and get it pretty soon, it's going to be gotten by somebody else. That was the game. It was a fun time. Anybody have anything they want to say before we close off the stream? As usual, if you want to give a thumbs up on your way out, I appreciate it. If you like these and if you're not subscribed already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That just helps YouTube surface more of me to you, and also to other people who might be interested in this kind of thing. I'll wait to see if chat catches up with anything. Otherwise, I'll let everybody get back to the rest of their days. Or nights. Whenever they're watching or listening to this. I'm trying to think if I have anything else to say. And I don't. Alright, I guess I will call it a stream. Thanks for everybody for hanging out. Game on. I imagine tomorrow I will be doing the OSR Reddit read-along, as is the usual, so check back for that. Enjoy the rest of your day, night, whenever you're watching or listening to this. Game on.